For my dad's retirement party, I paid for the venue, the catering, and the band, all anonymously. When the speeches started, he thanked everyone except me. My sister took the credit, and no one corrected her. I just stood there, quiet. Then I walked up to the stage, unplugged the mic, and told the band I was leaving. So is the one who paid. I, 32M, watched my father cry for the first time in my life at his retirement party, and they weren't tears of joy. The ballroom was perfect. Chandeliers cast warm light over 200 guests, tables draped in ivory cloth, centerpieces of white lilies and blue hydrangeas. The band I'd hired was setting up near the stage, their equipment gleaming under the spotlights. Waiters moved through the crowd with champagne flutes and appetizers. Everything was exactly as I'd planned it over 3 months of calls, deposits, and sleepless nights wondering if I could afford it all. I'd spent $43,000 on this party. My savings account was nearly empty. But this was Dad's night, the culmination of 37 years as a civil engineer, a man who'd built bridges and highways but somehow never quite built a bridge to me. Mom found me near the entrance and hugged me briefly. She asked if I'd seen my sister yet, and I told her not yet. She said my sister had been instrumental in planning everything, that she'd really outdone herself this time. I just nodded and took a sip of my champagne, the bubbles bitter on my tongue. The thing is, I'd done it all anonymously. I'd told the venue coordinator, the caterer, the band, everyone, that they were to keep my name completely confidential. When asked who was paying, they were instructed to say it was a family contribution. I didn't want the credit. I just wanted my father to have the send-off he deserved. I'd imagined him looking around the room, seeing all the effort and love that went into the evening, and maybe, just maybe, feeling proud of his son for once. My sister arrived fashionably late, sweeping through the doors in a red dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent. She'd always had that ability to command a room, to make heads turn. I'd always been the quieter one, the one who worked behind the scenes while she took center stage. She spotted Mom and rushed over, and I watched them embrace like they hadn't seen each other in years, though it had been maybe 2 weeks. She glanced at me and gave a quick wave, then immediately turned back to Mom, already talking about how crazy the planning had been, how she'd barely slept worrying about every detail. I felt something cold settle in my stomach, but I pushed it down. Maybe she was just excited. Maybe she didn't realize what she was implying. Dad arrived 30 minutes later, genuinely surprised. He thought he was coming to a small family dinner. When he walked into that ballroom and saw the crowd, his colleagues, his friends from college, his old military buddies, his face went through a series of expressions that almost made the whole thing worth it. Almost. The evening progressed smoothly. Dinner was served, a perfectly cooked filet mignon with roasted vegetables and garlic mashed potatoes. The band played tasteful jazz standards. People mingled and laughed, sharing stories about Dad's career, his terrible jokes on job sites, the time he'd accidentally approved plans that were upside down, and spent a week figuring out why nothing made sense. I stayed mostly quiet, moving between conversations, always on the periphery. A few people asked if I'd been involved in planning the party, and I gave vague answers, not wanting to lie, but not quite ready to claim credit either. I told myself I was waiting for the right moment, that when the speeches started, when Dad thanked everyone, I'd feel that warm glow of knowing I'd done something good. The speeches began at 9. My uncle went first, talking about Dad's dedication and work ethic. Then a former colleague shared a funny story about a project in the 80s. Then my mother took the microphone, and her voice cracked as she talked about the man she'd been married to for 40 years, how proud she was of everything he'd accomplished. Then my sister stepped up. She talked about family, about sacrifice, about wanting to give back to the man who'd given them everything. She talked about the months of planning, the phone calls, the stress of coordinating such a large event. She talked about choosing the venue, selecting the menu, finding the perfect band. She talked about every single detail that I had actually handled, and she talked about them as if they were her own accomplishments. I stood at the back of the room, my champagne glass empty in my hand, and I waited for her to mention me. I waited for her to say that she'd had help, that it was a team effort, that her brother had contributed in any way. But she didn't. She just basked in the applause, accepting compliments from people who told her what an amazing daughter she was. Then Dad took the microphone. He thanked everyone for coming. He thanked his colleagues for their friendship over the years. He thanked his wife for her unwavering support. He thanked his baby girl, his princess, for throwing him the party of a lifetime, for caring enough to make his retirement so special. He said he didn't know how she'd managed it, but he was grateful beyond words. He looked right past me, not through me, just past me, like I was part of the furniture, another guest blending into the wallpaper. I felt something crack inside my chest. It wasn't dramatic or sudden. It was quiet, like ice forming over water, slow and inevitable. All those years of trying to measure up, of working myself to exhaustion at my accounting firm, of sending money when they needed it, of showing up to every family event even when I wasn't explicitly invited, of trying so damn hard to be seen. And I still wasn't. My sister caught my eye from across the room and smiled, this triumphant, glowing smile. She knew. Of course she knew. She'd probably known from the moment Mom mentioned the party to her. She'd probably called the venue, claimed she was coordinating everything, inserted herself into my anonymous gesture, and made it her own. I set my glass down on a nearby table. My hands were steady. My mind was clear. I walked through the crowd, people parting slightly as I moved with purpose toward the stage. The band was playing again, something upbeat and celebratory. Dad was dancing with Mom, his face flushed with happiness. I stepped onto the stage. The lead guitarist noticed me first, his fingers faltering on the strings. I walked to the microphone stand and unplugged it, the music continuing but the vocals cutting out abruptly. The band stopped playing one by one, confusion spreading across their faces. The room fell quiet. 200 people turned to look at me. I told the band they could pack up. I told them I was leaving, and so was the person who actually paid for everything. I said it calmly, matter-of-factly, like I was commenting on the weather. The silence was absolute. My sister's face went white, then red. Dad looked confused, his eyes darting between me and her. Mom's hand went to her mouth. The venue coordinator appeared at the edge of the stage, looking panicked. He confirmed what I'd said, that I'd been the one to book everything, that all contracts and payments had gone through me, that I'd specifically requested anonymity. I didn't wait for the reaction. I turned and walked off the stage, down the center aisle between tables of stunned guests, and straight toward the exit. Behind me, I heard Dad call my name, his voice sharp with shock. I heard my sister start to say something, her words tripping over themselves. I heard Mom crying. I pushed through the doors and into the cool night air. My phone was already buzzing in my pocket, but I ignored it. I got in my car and drove home, my hands still steady on the wheel, my mind strangely quiet. The texts started flooding in around 10. Mom begged me to come back, to let them explain. My sister sent a long message about misunderstanding, about not realizing I'd wanted credit, about how she'd just been trying to help. Dad called 3 times before leaving a voicemail asking what the hell I was thinking, embarrassing the family like that. I turned my phone off and went to bed. Update 1. The next morning, my phone had 67 missed calls and over 100 texts. I made coffee and read through them methodically, like I was reviewing financial statements for a client. My sister's messages were frantic. She insisted she hadn't known I was the one who'd paid for everything, that she'd thought it was a family effort, and she was just organizing the details. She said I'd humiliated her in front of everyone, that I'd ruined Dad's night, that I was petty and vindictive. The last message told me to grow up. Mom's messages were more measured but equally desperate. She wanted to meet for breakfast, to talk things through, to understand why I'd reacted so strongly. She said Dad was hurt and confused, that he'd barely slept. She said family was supposed to stick together, not tear each other apart. Dad hadn't texted. He'd only called, and I wasn't ready to listen to those voicemails yet. I did listen to one message, though. It was from my uncle, Dad's brother. He said he'd suspected something wasn't right when my sister gave her speech, that he'd noticed my expression from across the room. He said what I did took guts, and while the timing could have been better, he understood why I'd snapped. He told me to take care of myself. That message made me cry into my coffee like an idiot. I spent the day at home, ignoring the continued calls. I knew I needed to face this eventually, but I wanted them to sit with it first. I wanted them to really think about what had happened, not just how it had ended, but everything that led up to it. Around 3, my best friend came over. He'd heard about the party through the grapevine, the story already spreading through our small community like wildfire. He asked me what I was going to do, and I told him I honestly didn't know. He pointed out that I'd made my point, but now I needed to decide what came next. Anger was easy. Rebuilding was hard. That evening, I finally read Dad's texts. They'd started coming through around noon. The first few were angry, telling me I owed everyone an apology, that I'd acted like a child. But the later ones were different. He asked if we could talk. He said he needed to understand. He said he was sorry if he'd missed something important. That last text sat heavy on my screen. Sorry if he'd missed something. Not sorry for missing it. Not sorry for overlooking me. Just if. I replied with a single message. I told him I'd paid for the party because I loved him and wanted him to have a perfect retirement celebration. I kept it anonymous because I didn't want credit, I just wanted him to be happy. Then I watched my sister take credit for every detail I'd arranged, and I watched him thank her without questioning it, without wondering if maybe his son had contributed something too. I told him I'd spent my entire life being invisible in our family, and I was done accepting it. I didn't wait for a response. I turned my phone off again. Update 2. 3 days passed before I agreed to meet with my parents. Not my sister, just them. We met at a coffee shop on neutral ground, a place where no one could make a scene without drawing attention. Mom hugged me when she saw me, and I let her, but I didn't hug back. Dad looked older than he had at the party, the lines around his eyes deeper. We sat down, ordered coffee, and then just stared at each other for a long moment. Dad spoke first. He said he'd had no idea I'd paid for anything, that he genuinely believed my sister had organized everything. He said if he'd known, of course he would have thanked me, that I should have told him. He said the way I'd handled it was wrong, that I'd humiliated the family and ruined what should have been a beautiful memory. I asked him why he thought my sister could afford a $43,000 party on her retail manager salary. He went quiet. Mom looked down at her coffee. I asked him why he never questioned it, why he just automatically assumed she'd done something that generous and elaborate without wondering if maybe someone else had helped. I asked him when the last time was that he'd acknowledged anything I'd done without me explicitly pointing it out. He said that wasn't fair, that he'd always been proud of me, that just because he didn't say it constantly didn't mean he didn't feel it. He said I'd always been self-sufficient, that I'd never needed the same level of support my sister did. He said he'd thought I understood that. I told him that was bullshit. I told him self-sufficient didn't mean invisible, and that I'd spent 32 years trying to earn recognition that he gave my sister freely just for showing up. I told him about the time I'd paid for Mom's surgery when insurance wouldn't cover it, and how he'd thanked my sister for being emotionally supportive during the crisis. I told him about the time I'd helped him fix his car, and he'd spent the whole time talking about my sister's new promotion. I told him about every birthday card I'd sent, every holiday I'd shown up for, every phone call I'd made that he'd cut short because he was busy. Mom was crying. Dad just sat there, his coffee untouched, his face unreadable. He finally asked what I wanted from him. Not in a hostile way, but genuinely. He asked what would make this right. I told him I wanted him to talk to my sister. I wanted him to ask her directly if she'd known who paid for the party. I wanted him to hear the truth from her, not filtered through Mom or buried under excuses. And then I wanted him to think about whether the daughter who'd lie and take credit for something that cost her brother his entire savings was really the one who deserved all his praise and attention. I told him I wanted him to think about the son who'd loved him enough to go broke for his happiness, and who'd been willing to do it anonymously because the gesture mattered more than the glory. Then I stood up and left. Update 3. My sister called me a week later, and for once, I answered. She didn't apologize. Instead, she told me Dad had confronted her, and she'd admitted she'd known I was the one paying. She said she'd found out from the venue coordinator early in the planning process and hadn't corrected anyone's assumptions because she'd figured I wouldn't mind, that I'd done it to be nice, not for recognition. I asked her if she really believed that or if she was just trying to convince herself she wasn't as terrible as she knew she'd been. She went quiet for a long time. Then she said she'd been jealous. She said I'd always had everything together, the steady job, the financial security, the ability to just handle things without falling apart. She said she'd wanted one thing, just one thing, where she was the capable one, the generous one, the good daughter. She said taking credit for the party had felt like finally being enough. I told her that was the saddest thing I'd ever heard, and I meant it. Not sad for me, but sad for her, that she'd been so desperate for Dad's approval that she'd stolen from her own brother. She asked if I'd ever forgive her. I told her I didn't know yet. I told her forgiveness wasn't a light switch I could flip just because she'd finally been honest. I told her we'd have to see what happened next, how she acted, whether she actually changed or just said the right words and went back to the same patterns. She accepted that. We hung up without saying goodbye. Dad called 2 hours later. He said he'd been thinking about everything I'd said and about his own behavior over the years. He said he'd always seen me as strong and independent, and he'd thought that meant I didn't need his attention the way my sister did. He said he realized now that was a cop-out, that he'd taken the easy path of focusing on the child who demanded attention and neglecting the one who'd never asked for it. He said he was sorry. Not sorry if he'd hurt me, just sorry. He asked if he could take me to dinner, just the two of us, no mom, no sister. He said he wanted to hear about my life, about my job, about everything he'd missed because he'd never bothered to ask. I told him yes. We met at a steakhouse the following week. It was awkward at first, both of us unsure how to navigate this new dynamic. But eventually, we found our rhythm. He asked about my work and actually listened when I explained the details of a complicated audit I'd been handling. He asked about my apartment, my hobbies, whether I was seeing anyone. He told me stories about his own career that I'd never heard before, moments of doubt and failure he'd never shared with anyone. At the end of the night, when the check came, he insisted on paying. Then he looked at me and said he couldn't repay me for the party, but he wanted to start making things right in whatever small ways he could. I told him dinner was a start. We've had dinner 3 more times since then. It's not perfect. There are still moments where he mentions my sister, and I feel that old resentment flare up. There are still conversations where I can tell he's not fully present, his mind wandering to something else. But he's trying, and that's more than I expected. Mom has been easier to reconcile with. She admitted she'd always known there was an imbalance in how they treated us, but she'd convinced herself it evened out somehow, that I got their respect and my sister got their attention. She said she was sorry for not pushing Dad to see me more clearly and for enabling my sister's behavior by making excuses for her. My sister and I are still distant. We've texted a few times, surface-level stuff about weather and work. She sent me a check for $5,000 last month with a note saying it was a start toward paying me back. I haven't cashed it yet. I'm not sure if I will. The thing is, that night at the party, when I unplugged the microphone and walked out, I didn't know what would happen next. I just knew I couldn't keep swallowing my hurt and pretending everything was fine. I couldn't keep being invisible. Sometimes people need to see the cost of their neglect. Sometimes you have to burn the bridge to make them realize they never should have let it decay in the first place. My relationship with my father will never be what it could have been if he'd seen me clearly from the start. Too many years were lost, too many moments overlooked. But maybe we can build something new, something honest, even if it's built on the ashes of what should have been. I paid $43,000 for my father's retirement party. I got a few awkward dinners and some painful conversations in return. But I also got something I'd been missing my entire life. I got to be seen. And maybe, in the end, that's worth more than the money ever was.